Manifesto of Surrealism by Breton, 1924. The belief in life, in that which is the most fragile of life, real life I mean, is so strong that in the end that belief is lost. Man, this inveterate dreamer, every day more dissatisfied with his fate, finds it difficult to evaluate the objects that he was brought to use, objects that his nonchalance brought to him, or that he acquired by his own efforts, almost always by his own efforts, because he agreed to work. At least he did not refuse to try his luck, or what he calls his luck. At this point he feels extremely modest. He knows what women he has had, what stupid affairs he has been involved in. He is not impressed by his wealth or poverty. In this regard he is still a newborn, and as for the approval of his conscience, I admit that he is doing very well without her. If he still has a certain lucidity, all he can do is go back to his childhood, which, if his guides and mentors botched him, still strikes him as charming. There, the absence of any known restrictions allows him the prospect of several lives lived at once. This illusion is firmly rooted in him. He is no longer interested only in the ephemeral, in the extreme ease of everything, children every day, careless in the world. Everything is at hand. The worst material conditions are good. The woods are white or black. We will never sleep. But it's true that we wouldn't venture that far. It's not just a matter of distance. The threat builds on the threat. You give in, you give up a part of the earth to conquer. This imagination, which knows no limits, can henceforth be exercised only in strict accordance with the laws of arbitrary utility. It cannot assume this inferior role for a very long time, and by the 20th year generally prefers to abandon man to his fate without brilliance. Although he may later try to pull himself together from time to time, having felt that he was gradually losing all reason for living, incapable as he has become of rising to some exceptional situation such as love, he will hardly succeed in doing so. This is because he now belongs body and soul to an imperative practical necessity which demands his constant attention. None of his gestures will be expansive, none of his ideas will be generous or far-reaching. In his mind, real or imagined events will be seen only insofar as they relate to a set of similar events, events in which he did not participate, events that were aborted. What am I saying? He will judge them in relation to one of these events whose consequences are more reassuring than the others. Under no circumstances will he consider them as his salvation. Beloved imagination, what I love most about you is your quality of being without reservation. There is still madness, quote, the madness that one locks up, unquote, as it has been well described, that madness or some other madness. We all know, indeed, that mad people owe their incarceration to a tiny number of legally reprehensible acts, and that without these acts, their freedom, or what we consider their freedom, would not be threatened. I am prepared to admit that they are to some extent victims of their imagination, and that it leads them to ignore certain rules, outside of which the species feels threatened, that we are all supposed to know and respect. But their profound indifference to the way we judge them, and even to the various punishments inflicted upon them, allows us to assume that they take great comfort and solace from their imagination, that they enjoy their madness enough to bear the thought that its validity does not extend beyond themselves. And indeed, hallucinations, illusions, etc., are not an insignificant source of pleasure. The best mastered sensuality participates in it, and I know that there are many evenings when I would be happy to see that pretty hand which, in the last pages of L'Intelligence de Taine, indulges in curious misdeeds. I could spend my whole life unlocking the secrets of madness. These people are honest as can be expected, and their naivety is matched only by mine. Columbus should have set out to discover America with a cargo of madmen. And note how that madness took shape and how it has endured. It is not fear of madness that will force us to let the flag of imagination fly. The case against the realistic attitude needs to be examined, following the case against the materialistic attitude. The latter, more poetic in fact than the former, certainly implies a kind of monstrous pride on the part of man, which is monstrous, but not a new and more complete decadence. Above all, it must be regarded as a welcome reaction against certain ridiculous tendencies of spiritism. Finally, it is not incompatible with a certain nobility of thought. On the other hand, the realistic attitude inspired by positivism, from St. Thomas Aquinas to Anatole France, seems to me to be clearly hostile to any intellectual or moral progress. I hate it because it is made up of mediocrity, hatred, and boring vanity. It is this attitude that today gives rise to these ridiculous books, these insulting plays. It constantly feeds on and reinforces itself from newspapers and stultifies both science and art by assiduously flattering the lowest tastes, clarity bordering on stupidity. The activity of the best minds feels the effects. The law of the lowest common denominator eventually prevails over them as over others. An amusing result of this state of affairs in literature, for example, is the generous supply of novels. Each person adds his or her own personal, quote, observation, unquote, to the whole. As a purifying antidote to all this, Mr. Paul Valéry recently suggested that an anthology be compiled in which as many first passages of novels as possible would be offered. The resulting madness, he predicted, would be a source of considerable edification. The most famous authors would be included. Such a reflection does credit to Paul Valéry, who, some time ago, speaking of novels, assured me that, as far as he was concerned, he would continue to refrain from writing, "The Marchioness came out at 5 o'clock." But did he keep his word? If the purely informative style of which the sentence we have just quoted is an excellent example, is practically the rule rather than the exception in the novel form, it is because, in all fairness, the author's ambition is severely circumscribed. The unnecessarily specific, circumstantial nature of each of their notations leads me to believe that they are making a joke at my expense. The slightest hesitation of the character is not spared me. Will he be blonde? What will his name be? Will we meet him for the first time during the summer? So many questions resolved once and for all. As chance would have it, the only discretion I have left is to close the book, which I take care to do somewhere near the first page. And the descriptions, there is nothing to which their emptiness can be compared. They are nothing but superimpositions of images taken from a stock catalogue, which the author uses more and more each time he wishes. He takes advantage of this to slip me his postcards. He tries to get me to agree with him on the clichés. The small room in which the young man was shown was covered with yellow wallpaper. There were geraniums at the windows, which were covered with muslin curtains. The setting sun cast a harsh light on the whole decor. There was nothing special about the room. The furniture, made of yellow wood, was all very old. A sofa with a high backrest folded down, an oval table in front of the sofa, a dressing table and a mirror placed on the pier glass, a few chairs along the walls, 2 or 3 worthless engravings depicting German girls with birds in their hands. Such was the furniture. Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment. I am not in the mood to admit that the mind is interested in dealing with such matters even fleetingly. Arguably, this description of a schoolboy has its place, and at this stage of the book the author has his reasons for charging me. Nevertheless, he is wasting his time because I refuse to enter his room. I am not interested in the laziness or fatigue of others. I have too unstable a notion of the continuity of life to assimilate or compare my moments of depression or weakness with my best moments. When you stop feeling, I think you should keep quiet. And I would like to make it clear that I do not accuse or condemn lack of originality as such. I am only saying that I do not particularly take note of the empty moments of my life, that it can be unworthy of any man to crystallize those that seem to him to be. I will, with your permission, ignore the description of this room and many others that resemble it. Not so fast now. I am entering the field of psychology, a subject on which I will refrain from joking. The author attacks a character and, having done so, parades his hero from one end of the world to the other. Whatever happens, this hero, whose actions and reactions are admirably predictable, is compelled not to thwart or upset, even if he seems to be, the calculations he is subject to. The currents of life may seem to lift him up, overturn him, throw him to the ground. He will always belong to this type of human being, ready-made. A simple game of chess that does not interest me in the least. Man, whoever he is, being for me a mediocre opponent. What I can't stand are these miserable discussions about this or that move, since there is no question of winning or losing. And if the game is not worth the candle, if objective reason does a dreadful job, as it does, in serving the one who invokes it, is it not proper and appropriate to avoid all contact with these categories? Quote, the diversity is so vast that every tone of voice is different, every step, every cough, every wiping of the nose, every sneeze. Pascal. If in a bunch of grapes there are not two similar ones, why do you want me to describe this grape by the other one, by all the others? Why do you want me to make an appetizing grape? Our brains are dulled by the incurable mania of wanting to make known, to classify the unknown. Barres, Proust. The result is excessively long statements whose power of persuasion is due solely to their strangeness, and which impress the reader only by the abstract quality of their vocabulary, which is, moreover, poorly defined. The general ideas that philosophy has hitherto proposed as subjects for discussion have, by their very nature, revealed their definitive incursion into a broader or more general field. I would be the first to greet the news with joy, but so far it has been a vain distribution. Flashes of wit and other subtleties compete to hide from us the true thought in search of itself, instead of concentrating on achieving success. It seems to me that each act is its own justification, at least for the one who has been able to commit it, that it is endowed with a radiant power whose slightest brilliance is certain to diminish. Thanks to this brilliance, it even ceases, in a sense, to occur. He gains nothing by being so distinguished. Stendhal's heroes are subject to the comments and appreciations, more or less successful, of this author, which adds nothing to their glory. Where we really find them is at the point where Stendhal has lost them. We are still living under the reign of logic. That, of course, is my point. But in this day and age, logical methods can only be applied to solving problems of secondary interest. Absolute rationalism, which is still in vogue, allows us to consider only those facts that relate directly to our experience. Logical ends, on the other hand, escape us. Needless to say, experience itself has become increasingly circumscribed. It is pacing around in a cage from which it is increasingly difficult to make it emerge. It, too, relies on the most immediate expedient and is protected by the sentinels of common sense. Under the pretext of civilization and progress, we have succeeded in banishing from the mind all that may be called, rightly or wrongly, superstition or fantasy. Any search for truth that is not in accordance with custom is forbidden. It is apparently by pure chance that a part of our mental world which we had been pretending to no longer care about, and in my opinion by far the most important, has been brought back to light. For that we must thank Sigmund Freud for his discoveries. On the basis of these discoveries, a current of opinion is finally formed, thanks to which the human explorer will be able to conduct his investigation much further, since it will no longer be limited to the most summary realities. Perhaps the imagination is about to reassert itself, to claim its rights. If the depths of our mind contain in them strange forces capable of increasing those on the surface, or of waging a victorious battle against them, there is every reason to seize them, first to seize them, then, if need be, to subject them to the control of our reason. The analysts themselves have everything to gain, but it is interesting to note that no means has been appointed a priori to carry out this commitment, that until further notice it can be interpreted as being of the competence of poets as well as scholars, and that its success does not depend on the more or less capricious paths that will be followed. Freud rightly put his critical sense at the service of the dream. It is in fact inadmissible that this considerable portion of psychic activity, since at least from man's birth until his death, thought does not offer any solution of continuity, the sum of the moments of the dream from the point of view of time, and taking into consideration only the time of pure dreaming, that is, dreams of sleep, is not inferior to the sum of the moments of reality, or to be more precisely limiting the moments of awakening, has been so grossly neglected even today. I have always been astonished at the way in which an ordinary observer gives much more credit and importance to the events of waking than to those that occur in dreams. This is because man, when he stops sleeping, is above all the plaything of his memory, and in his normal state memory likes to retrace weakly for him the circumstances of the dream, to take away all real importance, to discard the only determinant of the point at which he thinks he has left it a few hours before, that firm hope, that anxiety. He has the impression that he is pursuing something worthwhile. Thus the dream is reduced to a simple parenthesis, like night. And like the night, dreams generally contribute little to understanding. This curious state of affairs seems to me to call for some reflections. 1. Within the limits within which they operate, or are supposed to operate, dreams give all the evidence of being continuous and show signs of organization. Only memory arrogates to itself the right to extract from dreams, to ignore transitions, and to depict a series of dreams rather than the dream itself. Likewise, at a given moment, we have only a distinct notion of reality, the coordination of which is a matter of will. We must take into account the depths of the dream. For the most part, I retain only what I can glean from its most superficial layers. What I like to contemplate most in a dream is everything that sinks below the surface in the waking state, everything I have forgotten from my activities of the day before, the dark foliage, the stupid branches. In reality, likewise, I prefer to fall. The point to note is that there is no reason to presuppose a greater dissipation of the elements of which the dream is made up. I'm sorry to have to speak about it according to a formula that excludes in principle the dream. When will we have sleeping logicians, sleeping philosophers? I would like to sleep in order to abandon myself to dreamers, just as I abandon myself to those who read to me with my eyes wide open. In order to stop imposing the conscious rhythm of my thought in this field, perhaps my dream of last night follows that of the previous night, and will continue the next night with exemplary rigor. It is quite possible, as the saying goes, and since it is not at all proven that in so doing the reality with which I am occupied continues to exist in the dream state, that it does not descend into the immemorial, why should I not grant to the dream what I sometimes denied to reality? That is to say, the value of certainty in itself, which in its time is not open to my repudiation. Why should I not expect more from the sign of the dream than I expect from a degree of consciousness that is more acute every day? Can't the dream also be used to solve the fundamental question of life? Are these questions the same in both cases? And in the dream, do these questions already exist? Is the dream less restrictive or punitive than the rest? I am getting older, and more than this reality to which I believe I am subjecting myself, perhaps it is the dream, the difference with which I treat the dream, that makes me grow old. 2. Let me return to the waking state. I have no choice but to consider it as a phenomenon of interference. Not only does the mind in this state display a strange tendency to lose its bearings, as evidenced by the slips and errors whose secrets are just beginning to be revealed to us, but what is more, it does not seem that when the mind is functioning normally, it really responds to anything other than the suggestions that come to it from the depths of that dark night to which I recommend it. However conditioned it may be, its equilibrium is relative. He hardly dares to express himself, and if he does, he merely verifies that such and such an idea, such and such a woman has marked him. What an impression, it would be difficult to say, by which he reveals the degree of his subjectivity and nothing more. This idea, this woman, bothers her. They tend to make her less severe. What they do is to isolate the spirit for a second from its solvent and animate it towards the sky, like the beautiful precipitate that it can be, that it is. When all else fails, he then appeals to chance, to a deity in a corner of the earth. The spirit of the man that dreameth is fully satisfied with what cometh unto him. The agonizing question of the possible is no longer relevant. Kill, fly faster, love as you please. And if you were to die, are you not sure that you would wake up among the dead? Let yourself be carried away. Events will not tolerate your interference. You are nameless. The ease of it all is priceless. What reason, I ask you, a reason so much more vast than the other, makes dreams seem so natural and allows me to welcome without reservation a host of episodes so strange that they could disconcert me as I write? And yet I believe my eyes, my ears, this great day has arrived, this beast has spoken. If man's awakening is more difficult, if he breaks the spell too brutally, it is because he has been led to form too impoverished an idea of atonement. 4. From the moment when he is subjected to a methodical examination, when by means yet to be determined one succeeds in recording the contents of dreams in their entirety, and this presupposes a discipline of memory which extends over several generations. But let us begin, nevertheless, by noting down the most salient facts. When his graph widens with unequaled volume and regularity, one can hope that the mysteries, which are not really mysteries, will give way to the great mystery. I believe in the future resolution of these two states, dream and reality, which are apparently so contradictory, into a kind of absolute reality, a surreality, so to speak. It is in search of this surreality that I am going, certain that I will not find it, but too unaware of my death not to calculate the joys of its possession. There is a story according to which Saint Paul Roux used to post on the door of his manor house in Camaret every night before going to sleep a notice that said, "Le poète travaille," the poet works. Much more could be said, but in passing I just wanted to touch on a subject which in itself would require a very long and much more detailed discussion. I will come back to it. My intention at this stage was simply to make a point of noting the hatred of the wonderful that rages in some men, the absurdity under which they try to bury it. Let us not mince our words. The marvelous is always beautiful. All that is marvelous is beautiful. In fact, only the marvelous is beautiful. In the field of literature, only the marvelous is capable of fecundating works that belong to an inferior category, such as the novel, and generally speaking, anything that involves storytelling. Lewis's Monk is admirable proof of this. He is imbued with the presence of the marvelous. Long before the author has freed his main characters from all temporal constraints, one feels them ready to act with unprecedented pride. This passion for eternity with which they are constantly stirred gives an unforgettable intensity to their torments, and to mine. What I mean is that this book, from beginning to end, and in the purest possible way, has an exhilarating effect only on that part of the spirit which aspires to leave the earth, and which, stripped of an insignificant part of its plot, which belongs to the period in which it was written, constitutes a paragon of precision and innocent grandeur. What is admirable in the fantastic is that there is nothing fantastic anymore. There is only the real. It seems to me that nothing better has been done, and that the character of Matilda, in particular, is the most moving creation that can be attributed to this figurative mode in literature. She is less a character than a continual temptation. And if a character is not a temptation, what is it? An extreme temptation, her. In The Monk, the, quote, "nothing is impossible to the one who dares to try," gives her full measure convincing. The ghosts play a logical role in the book, since the critical mind does not grasp them to challenge them. Ambrosio's punishment is also treated legitimately, since it is finally accepted by the critical faculty as a natural outcome. It may seem arbitrary on my part, speaking of the marvelous, to choose this model from which Nordic and Oriental literatures have borrowed many times, not to mention the religious literature of each country. It is because most of the examples that these literatures could have given me are childish, for the simple reason that they are aimed at children. Children are weaned very early from the marvelous, and later they do not retain a virginity of spirit sufficient to fully enjoy fairy tales. As charming as they are, a grown man would think he is returning to childhood by feeding on fairy tales, and I am the first to admit that all these tales do not suit him. The web of adorable improbabilities needs to be made a little more subtle as we grow up, and we are still at the age of waiting for that kind of spider. But the faculties don't change radically. Fear, the lure of the unusual, chance, a taste for the extravagant are all tricks that we can always call upon without fear of deception. There are fairy tales for adults to write, fairy tales that are still almost blue. The marvelous is not the same in every period of history. It participates in an obscure way in a kind of general revelation of which only fragments reach us. It is the romantic ruins, the modern mannequin, or any other symbol capable of affecting human sensibility for a certain period of time. In these areas that make us smile, the incurable human restlessness is still depicted. The incurable human restlessness is still depicted, and that is why I take them into consideration and consider them inseparable from certain productions of genius that are, more than others, painfully afflicted by it. They are the gallows of Villon, the Greeks of Racine, the sofas of Baudelaire. They coincide with an eclipse of the taste I am made to endure, me whose notion of taste is the image of a great stain. In the bad taste of my time, I try to go further than others. It would be me if I had lived in 1820, me, quote, the bleeding nun, unquote. Me who would not have spared this cunning and banal cachons of which the parodic cuisine speaks. It would be me who would have unveiled in the enormous metaphors, as he says, all the phases of the silver disc. For today I am thinking of a castle, half of which is not necessarily in ruins. This castle belongs to me. I imagine it in a rustic setting, not far from Paris. The outbuildings are too numerous to mention, and as for the interior, it has been horribly restored, so that it leaves nothing to be desired in terms of comfort. Cars are parked in front of the door, hidden by the shade of the trees. Some of my friends live here as permanent guests. Louis Aragon is leaving. He only has time to say hello. Philippe Soupol is rising with the stars, and Paul Eluard, our great Eluard, hasn't returned yet. There are Robert Desnos and Roger Vitrac on the field, wondering about an old dueling decree. Georgia Auric, Jean-Paul Hahn, Max Maurice, who rose so well, and Benjamin Perret, busy with his equations with the birds, and Joseph Deltel, and Jean Carivet, and Georges Limbourg. And Georges Limbourg, there's a whole hedge of Georges Limbourgs, and Marcel Noll, there's T. Frankel greeting us with his tethered balloon, Georges Malkain, Antonin Artaud, Francis Gerard, Pierre Naville, J.A. Boiffard, and others. After them, Jacques Baron and his brother, handsome and cordial, and so many others, and beautiful women, I might add. Nothing is too beautiful for these young men. Their wishes are, as for wealth, so many commandments. Francis Picabia is coming to visit us, and last week in the Hall of Mirrors we received a certain Marcel Duchamp, whom we did not yet know. Picasso goes hunting in the neighborhood. The spirit of demoralization has taken up residence in the castle, and it is with him that we have to deal whenever it comes to contact with our fellow men. But the doors are always open, and we don't start by thanking everyone, you know. Besides, the solitude is vast. We don't cross paths very often. In any case, isn't the important thing that we are the masters of ourselves, the masters of women, and of love too?